It started with the sound of porcelain shattering. Then came silence. In the small apartment above a shuttered hardware store in East Boston, 7-year-old Sophie Ruiz stood frozen at the doorway to the kitchen. Her mother lay on the floor, motionless. One arm sprawled across a spilled cup of chamomile tea. Steam still rose from the broken mug. Elena's head had struck the cabinet on the way down. Blood now traced a thin line behind her ear. Sophie dropped her stuffed koala and stepped forward on trembling legs. "Mom." No answer. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She did what her mother had told her to do if anything ever went wrong. "Call Uncle Ryan." She climbed onto the counter, grabbed her mother's phone, and opened the contacts list. Her fingers were cold. She misdialed, just one number off. The call connected. A man's voice came through, calm and low. Sophie hesitated. "I'm sorry, is this Ryan?" "No. I need help. My mom fell. She's bleeding. She's not waking up. Please come." Then static. Damian Ward stood in the dark, barefoot on the polished concrete of his penthouse, phone still to his ear. The city glittered through the glass behind him, indifferent and distant. "Where are you?" he asked. The little voice hesitated. "I don't know the street, but we live above Jimmy's Tools. There's a red door, apartment 3B. That was enough. Damien didn't ask more. He didn't tell his assistant, didn't call an ambulance. He threw on a coat and grabbed the keys. 13 minutes later, the black SUV tore down a frozen back street and screeched to a stop. The building was what the city called historic, which really meant neglected. A red door, barely hanging on its hinges, stood at the top of 3 concrete steps crusted with old ice. He took them 2 at a time. The hallway smelled like dust and old radiator steam. Apartment 3B had the door open just an inch. Damien knocked once. The door creaked wider. A small girl stood in the narrow gap, her socks soaked, clutching the edge of her mother's phone like it was a shield. "You came," she said. "I did." She stepped back. Damien entered without asking. The apartment was neat but worn. A pile of laundry in the corner, soup still warming on the stove, a calendar on the fridge with 3 dates circled in red. He knelt beside Elena. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. He checked her pulse, pressed gently on her ribs. Concussion, maybe more. She needed help now. He scooped her up in his arms without hesitation. She was light, too light for someone who probably skipped meals so her daughter wouldn't. "Coat," he said gently to Sophie. She grabbed her jacket and followed him out. The SUV roared to life. He blasted heat into the cabin as Sophie climbed into the back beside her mother. Damien drove with one hand, already calculating the nearest emergency entrance with the shortest wait time. At the second red light, Sophie spoke. "You're not Ryan." "No." "Are you a doctor?" "No." She thought about that, then said softly, "You came anyway." Damien didn't answer. He glanced in the mirror. She was watching him, not with fear, with something else. Hope. He turned back to the road. "She's going to be okay." "You promise?" "I do." He didn't know why he said that, but in that moment, it was the only thing that felt true. At the ER entrance, Damien didn't wait for a nurse. He carried Elena straight inside, past the check-in desk, past the protests of a night clerk, and directly to the trauma bay. "I'm not leaving her in the hallway," he said simply. They didn't argue again. While doctors worked on stabilizing Elena, Damien sat in the waiting area with Sophie. She curled up on the bench beside him, her jacket still zipped up to her chin. He handed her a warm bottle of water. She held it without drinking. "Is she your mom?" he asked. She nodded. "She works a lot." Damien glanced at the vending machine, then back to Sophie. "You hungry?" She shook her head. "She'd want me to stay right here." He didn't press her. Half an hour later, a nurse came out. Elena was stable. Concussion, dehydration, exhaustion, no internal bleeding. "She'll wake up soon," the nurse said. "You can go see her." Sophie looked at Damien. "Will you come too?" He paused, then nodded. Elena blinked, her throat dry, her body stiff like she'd been asleep too long in the wrong position. A dull pain bloomed in her left temple. She turned her head, wincing, and saw a man sitting quietly in the corner of the hospital room. Not a doctor, not anyone she recognized. She sat up too fast. The IV in her hand tugged. The man stood. His voice was low but calm. "Careful, you lost a lot of blood." Elena stared at him. Who are you?" There was a long pause before he replied. "I got a phone call from your daughter. She said you fell. I was the one who brought you here." Her lips parted. "Wait." Sophie called from the doorway. "Mama!" The memory hit her like a jolt. The kitchen floor, her knees buckling, the cold tiles, then blackness. She closed her eyes. God, I must have told her to call Ryan. He lives 2 floors down. She must have dialed the wrong number. He nodded once. She was scared, but she did exactly what she had to do. Elena opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked down at the IV line, her breathing still shaky. Then she said it quietly but clearly, "Thank you for coming, for helping her, helping me." The man didn't nod or smile, but something shifted in his posture, a slight loosening of his shoulders, like a weight had been acknowledged. "She was bleeding," he said. "I didn't think twice. I just drove." She looked up at him. "You didn't call an ambulance." "I didn't have time to wait. I was closer than they would have been." A pause. "And I knew what it's like to wish someone would show up, and no one ever does." Elena didn't ask what he meant. The way he said it, flat, precise, with nothing ornamental, told her it wasn't something he said often. A soft knock on the door broke the moment. Sophie peeked in, holding a small stuffed bear under her arm, her hair still messy from sleep. When she saw her mother sitting upright, she ran in, arms flung wide. "Mama?" Elena pulled her into a hug. "Hey, baby, I'm okay. I'm okay now." Sophie looked at Damien, then back at her mom. "He came fast, just like in movies. His car was shiny and loud." Elena managed to laugh. She looked up at the man. "I'm sorry I didn't catch your name." "Damien," he said simply. "Damien Ward." The name made her blink. She had heard it before somewhere, but before she could place it, a nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Miss Elena, your vitals look good. We can discharge you within the hour, but we'll need someone to sign the papers." Elena turned to Damien, surprised. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," he replied, "but I did." Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper. "Discharge is done, and your bill is covered." Elena froze. "What?" "I signed as a responsible party. It's done." "I can't." "You don't have to. Just take your daughter home." Sophie tilted her head. "Is he your friend now, Mama?" Elena looked at the man in the coat, the calm face that had seen her at her most vulnerable, and said nothing judgmental, just acted. Then she looked at Sophie and said softly, "He might be." As the nurse helped her out of the bed, Elena turned once more to Damien. "Thank you, not just for tonight, for staying." He nodded once, then turned to leave without another word. But just before he stepped out the door, he paused. "Elena, right?" She looked up. "The hospital you used to work for, was it St. Marin's?" She blinked. "Yes, why?" "No reason," he said, "just sounded familiar." And then he was gone. But the weight of his presence still lingered, like a door that hadn't quite closed. The cab dropped them off just before sunrise. Frost clung to the edge of the windows as Elena unlocked the apartment door, her hand trembling slightly from fatigue more than cold. Sophie's fingers were looped through hers, silent but close. The moment they stepped inside, the smell hit her. Metallic, faint but sharp. She paused at the kitchen doorway. The puddle had dried into a dark smear across the linoleum. The mop lay tipped over against the counter, untouched since the night she collapsed. Elena moved quickly, ushering Sophie to the bedroom. "Get changed, honey. I'll make something warm." As soon as the door clicked behind her daughter, Elena dropped to her knees with a damp rag and began scrubbing. Each motion was quiet and focused. She didn't cry. She didn't think. She just erased. Halfway through rinsing the cloth, a knock came, not a light tap. 3 solid, deliberate raps. She froze. Few people knocked on their door. Ryan would have called. The landlord wouldn't bother this early. When she opened the door, Damien stood there. No coat this time, just a sweater under a blazer and a paper bag in his hand. "I brought some basic supplies," he said. "Antiseptics, gauze. I didn't know what the hospital gave you." Elena blinked, caught off guard by his presence more than the gesture. "You didn't have to. I didn't do it for thanks," he said simply. "May I come in?" Sophie peeked out from the bedroom, her smile quick and bright. "Hi, Mr. Damien." Elena hesitated only a second, then stepped aside. He walked in, placed the bag on the counter, and took a slow look around the small apartment. His eyes paused briefly on the kitchen floor, then returned to hers. "I meant what I said. Your daughter did something most adults wouldn't do in that moment." Elena leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "She's strong, has to be." A beat of silence passed. Then Damien spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "St. Marin's. That was your last job, right?" She nodded. "I was head nurse on the oncology floor for 8 years." "You left voluntarily?" "No," she said, her jaw tightening. I filed a formal complaint after a patient died, an equipment error no one wanted to admit to. The finance board said it was an isolated issue. They shut me out before I could push further. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. Do you remember the nature of the malfunction? Her breath caught. A cardiac monitor failed during a chemo-related complication. The alert never sounded. We caught it too late. He said nothing for a moment, then asked, You still have documentation? Elena studied him. Why do you care? Because that hospital receives funding from a foundation I once sat on, he replied. And the name St. Maran has come up in more than one irregularity report over the past 2 years. I never looked into it until now. There was a shift in her face, something between disbelief and recognition. Damien continued, calmly but clearly, If there's anything you kept, anything official, I'd like to see it, off the record. She hesitated, then turned, walked to a side drawer near the fridge, and pulled out a brown envelope taped shut and labeled in her handwriting. Connor, September 28th report. She handed it to him. I was going to submit it to the state medical board, she said, but by then I was already being pushed out. HR accused me of falsifying records. It never made it past legal review. Damien took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside were incident logs, screenshots of internal emails, and one printout circled in red, a delivery receipt for defective monitors signed by the hospital's CFO. He read the name, then looked up. This signature, you saw it personally? No, she said, but the CFO signed off the supply orders for our floor. I assumed he'd have known. Damien folded the file closed. I know that name, he said. He worked on 2 of my early wellness centers. Both went over budget, both shut down in under a year. He didn't explain more. He didn't have to. Then gently he handed the file back. Do you trust me enough to keep this for now? Elena's gaze was firm. I don't trust easily, but I trust facts. If you can do something with it, quietly, then keep it. Sophie reappeared, now in a mismatched outfit and holding a stuffed panda under one arm. She looked up at her mother, then at Damien. Can he stay for pancakes? Elena let out the smallest laugh, the tension loosening just a fraction in her shoulders. Maybe next time, she said. He has important work. Damien gave Sophie a rare half smile. Next time sounds good. He turned to Elena, a subtle seriousness returning. Someone buried this. Someone with reach. If I find anything, I'll let you know, but if you remember more, call me directly. He handed her a black card, no logo, just a number. And then he was gone. This time, the door closed all the way. But what lingered behind wasn't silence. It was something new. Movement, momentum, a spark. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Damien didn't go home that night. He sat in his office overlooking the frozen river. The city lights cast a cold reflection across the glass. His coat was still on. The file Elena had handed him earlier lay open across his desk, each page lined with careful annotations, time-stamped records, and signatures that didn't quite match. At 2 a.m., the building was silent. Only the low hum of the server room and the occasional creak of metal from the heating vents kept him company. But Damien's mind was far louder. He wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or investor calls. He wasn't thinking about his tech empire or the board's demands for a strategic rebrand. He was thinking about Elena and the way her hands shook slightly when she passed him the folder. But her eyes stayed steady. The kind of steadiness that comes from being ignored too long to waste time begging for belief. He reached for his phone and dialed a private line. One ring. Jonas, he said as soon as it connected, I need a complete audit of the Westwood Medical Fund. Full grant history, including subcontractors, tonight. The man on the other end didn't argue. He knew the tone. I'll start pulling it now. Damien hung up and leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't slept since the night of the call, and even before that, he hadn't really rested in months, years maybe. A beep flashed on his screen. Internal investigation, CFO, Westwood Health Initiative. He clicked it open. The name stared back at him, Andrew Kalin. That name had surfaced once before. Kalin had been the CFO on 3 separate wellness projects Damien had invested in back in 2018. 2 mobile health clinics and a rural diagnostics pilot. All 3 had failed within 18 months. Budgets ballooned, outcomes vanished. He'd written them off as market inefficiencies. But the name wasn't coincidence anymore. Not now. Another message came through. Unusual payouts flagged February 2021. $480,000 redirected to subsidiary registered under Medcore Integrated Holdings, LLC. Damien clicked on the corporate profile. Silent partner listed as A. Kalin. He closed the screen, stood. This wasn't just negligence. This was systemic, deliberate, and someone had been paying to keep it quiet. He picked up the phone again. This time, he didn't call a lawyer. He called her. The line buzzed once, twice, then Elena's voice came through, groggy. "Hello, it's me," Damien said, his voice low but steady. "I know it's late. I wouldn't have called unless it was important." There was a pause on the other end. She didn't sound startled, only quiet. "I'm listening," she said. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened the night of the monitor failure," Damien said. "Not the report, not the file, the real thing. The sequence, the conversations, what you saw, what you felt. I need you to walk me through it like it's happening again." Silence stretched out between them. Then, "There was a boy," she said. "Connor, 7 years old, leukemia. His counts were low and the chemo had been hard on his heart. I told them we needed round-the-clock telemetry, not just pulse ox. They gave us Unit 4C. It had already flagged malfunctions the week before. I reported it. Nothing changed." She took a breath. "Night shift. I was covering for another nurse. Connor went into cardiac distress just after 2 a.m. The alert never sounded. We found him when his mother ran out into the hallway screaming. He coded before we got him back to ICU. He died 40 minutes later." She paused, then added quieter, "They told me it was a fluke, but I saw the logs. The monitor never registered, and the device report had been altered by the time I accessed it again." Damien felt something in his chest tighten. "This wasn't about money for you." "No," she replied. "It was about that mother, about the look on her face when I told her there was nothing else we could do. That face has never left me." Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Damien said it. "Thank you. I believe you. I'll do the rest." "I don't want revenge," she said gently. "I want it to stop happening." He nodded, though she couldn't see him. "So do I." Before he hung up, she said something that caught him off guard. "I didn't expect someone to follow up on that file, especially not you." Damien's voice was quiet. "Neither did I." He ended the call and leaned over the desk once more. The city outside remained asleep, but something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, Damien didn't feel like he was circling the same stories, the same scandals, the same cleanup jobs masked as philanthropy. This mattered, and he wasn't going to stop. The boardroom at the 47th floor of Lucent Corp's Midtown Tower had never seen Damien Ward in silence for this long. The man who once rewired half the East Coast's emergency networks with a single strategic pitch was now leaning forward in his chair, not speaking. He stared at the beige folder lying between him and Charles Whitmore, a seasoned board member and co-founder of one of the early venture groups that had believed in Damien a decade ago. Charles adjusted his reading glasses, flipping through the printed sheets Damien had brought without a word. "These aren't public records," he said quietly. "No," Damien replied, voice flat. Charles kept reading. Names, timestamps, transfer logs, screenshots of internal dashboards from the hospital's funding allocations. At the end of the packet was a single-page letter, unsigned, dated 7 years ago, written by a nurse who had refused to look away from a fatal monitoring error. Charles read the name aloud. "Elena, you've been thorough." "She didn't send the letter," Damien replied. "She kept it hidden until 2 nights ago." Charles didn't lift his eyes. "What does she want?" "Nothing," Damien said. "That's why I'm here." A long silence passed. In the distance, the Manhattan skyline throbbed in its usual rhythm, unaware that somewhere in this room, the walls of a major health fund might be shaking. Charles finally spoke. "Damien, if even half of this is true, we're not talking about a compliance error. We're talking about criminal concealment. Funds misappropriated during patient fatality investigations. The CFO signed these." Damien nodded once. "Publicity like this won't just damage Lucent's image. It could tank every joint initiative connected to that fund. Lawsuits, class actions." Charles leaned back. "Then what are you doing?" "I want the truth to be acknowledged internally. I want that man removed and the records audited. No fanfare, no press conference. Justice quietly." Charles studied Damien's face. For a moment, he seemed to see not the sharp executive Lucent stockholders feared and admired, but the version of him that had disappeared from the headlines 2 years ago after the disastrous AI pilot rollout that cost lives, reputation, and nearly his sanity. "You want to protect the nurse," Charles said. "I want to protect what's left of decency in this system," Damien replied, his voice carrying no tremble, No fire, just a low, steady determination. She spoke up once and lost everything. I won't let that happen again. Charles closed the folder and slid it back across the table. He tapped two fingers on the cover. I'll start with the audit committee, but this stays off the books until we get clean verification from legal. If this leaks, it won't, Damien cut in. I've already spoken with Catherine from compliance. She's standing by with redacted backups. No digital trail. Charles let out a breath. God, you really don't sleep, do you? Damien offered a dry smile. Not when good people bleed in the shadows. Outside, the city lights flickered against the clouds. Damien stood up, shook Charles's hand once, and left without another word. That night in his apartment, he sat on the floor with the folder open again. He didn't look at the numbers. He looked at the letter, at the hesitant handwriting of a woman who had once believed in a system that never protected her. And he thought, if Sophie hadn't called the wrong number, none of this would have surfaced. He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in small chances, and this time he wouldn't waste one. The knock came just after 9. Elena opened the door to find Damien standing there, coat still unbuttoned, eyes shadowed with something heavier than exhaustion. She stepped aside without a word. Sophie was already in bed. The soft hum of her nightlight buzzed faintly from the next room. In the kitchen, Elena poured 2 cups of tea and slid one across the table. You found something, didn't you? Damien nodded, placing a folder on the table. This one thinner than before, but somehow heavier. Elena, he said, voice low, I want you to come back with me. Not to St. Marine, not as a nurse. I want you as a temporary independent advisor. You're the only one who knows the inside of that system and isn't tainted by it. Elena didn't move. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. No. Damien blinked. I haven't even explained. I don't need you to, she cut him off. I lived it. I remember every hallway, every emergency shift, every name they erased. You think I don't want justice? I do, but I also want to protect what's left of me. Silence spread between them like a crack forming in glass. Damien's voice softened. I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe you were the only one who could hold the truth together. That's not fair, she whispered. You want me to walk back into the place that broke me? Into the system that rewarded silence? Do you know what it takes to get out of that and stay sane? Damien didn't answer. It was Sophie's voice that broke the silence. From the hallway, small and unsure. Mom? Elena turned. You should be asleep. But Sophie stepped forward, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes flicked to Damien, then back to her mother. If you help them, will the bad people stop hurting others? Elena's breath caught in her chest. She looked at her daughter, the reason she'd stayed quiet all these years. The reason she'd wanted a simple life away from headlines and meetings and moral compromises. Then she looked at Damien, waiting, not pushing. She closed her eyes and exhaled. All right, I'll do it. Damien didn't move. But I have one condition, she said, standing straighter. I don't do this for you. I don't do it for your company or your board. I do it for the patients who never got a second chance. And when this is over, I walk away. Damien nodded. That's all I hoped for. Later that night in his car, Damien called Jonas. She's in, he said. Jonas didn't celebrate. Then I hope she's ready, boss, because what I just pulled from MedCor's old shell accounts links them back to a second facility, a rural palliative center in Vermont. Guess who signed off on the transfer approval? Damien's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Andrew Kalin. Exactly, Jonas said. We're not just looking at embezzlement. We're looking at patient neglect for profit. Damien didn't speak for a long moment. Then, start building the map. Trace every connection, but keep Elena's name out of every report. Already done. In the apartment upstairs, Elena sat at the dining table long after Damien left. The folder lay unopened in front of her. Her tea had gone cold. She reached into the kitchen drawer, pulled out her old hospital ID, and stared at it. Then she put it down and reached instead for the red spiral notebook she kept beneath Sophie's coloring books. The one with notes, charts, initials, everything she'd once thought she'd burn. She opened to the first page and started rewriting history, this time with no intention of hiding it. The sun had barely risen when Jonas stepped into the private office on the 12th floor. A file pressed to his chest and a weariness in his eyes that spoke of too many hours combing through digital dust. Damien stood at the window, watching the street below, silent. He didn't turn around. You should see this, Jonas said, placing the folder on the glass table between them. It's the break we needed. Inside, stapled between pages of ledger exports and audit trails, was a scanned PDF, a transfer authorization from St. Maron Hospital dated December 17th, 2021. Signed, Elena, stamped approved by CFO Andrew Kalin. The problem was Elena had never worked in the finance department, and she never signed off on anything beyond medical purchases. She certainly hadn't been on duty the night that form was time-stamped. Damien's hand clenched around the folder. She told me she never touched anything like this. She didn't, Jonas said. I had her signature from an old HR file. The loops are wrong, the baseline's too steady. It was forged. A long pause filled the room. Then Damien spoke, voice low and sharp. We send it now, today. He picked up the phone, not to call legal, but to call Elena. Her voice was calm. I'll meet you at the apartment. I want to see it myself. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and old radiator heat. Sophie was at school. The silence was unusually thick. Damien laid the document on the kitchen table. Elena read it slowly. Her jaw didn't tighten. Her hands didn't shake. She only blinked once, and that was when she saw her own name forged in tight, unnatural loops. I don't remember anything about that night, she said quietly, but I know I didn't sign this. I know, Damien replied. He paused, watching her. I should have known they'd use your name. You were already discredited. No one would question it. That was the point. Use someone broken. No one listens to the ones who've already fallen. Elena stood up, her chair scraping softly against the old tile floor. She moved to the sink, ran cold water over her hands. Her voice came back steadier. If we send this, Andrew is not going to go quietly. He won't get the chance, Damien said. The board is already preparing an emergency vote. We'll submit the full report before noon. A formal audit will follow, but once his signature goes public, he's finished. Elena dried her hands, turned back to him. Then let me be the one to send it. Damien looked at her, eyes searching. You sure? I need to end this. For every patient who trusted me, for every shift I covered, while someone else patted their pockets. He nodded once. I'll be right here. She clicked, send. 41 hours later, a notice was posted inside the executive channel of the Westwood board. Andrew Kalin suspended indefinitely, pending internal and federal investigation. The boardroom was unusually quiet that morning. It had been 48 hours since Andrew's suspension. The internal investigation moved quickly once the forged documents surfaced, and Jonas confirmed the MedCorp trail through multiple shell accounts. One by one, the pieces fell into place. Neat, damning, indisputable. And yet Elena stood by the window of Damien's office, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She didn't ask for results. She didn't ask if the man who tried to bury the truth was going to prison. She only asked one thing when Damien showed her the final report. Are the machines still being used? Damien shook his head. They were pulled 2 days ago. Every single unit flagged. You did that. Her shoulders dropped slightly, but her face didn't soften. Instead, she turned to him and said quietly, then I'm done. Damien blinked. You mean I'm not going back to hospitals? Not to boards, not to policies, not to compliance meetings. I gave too much of myself to systems that swallowed people whole. I won't do it again. Damien took a breath, nodded. I understand. But he didn't stop there. I want you to stay on as an independent auditor. Flexible schedule, full benefits, triple what you made before. Elena didn't even hesitate. No. Damien raised an eyebrow. It's not charity, he said. It's what you're worth. She looked up at him then, her gaze steady and sharp. Exactly. That's why I get to choose what peace looks like for me. A long pause. He didn't argue. Outside the glass wall behind them, the city buzzed as usual. Rain tapped softly against the pavement, barely audible above the low hum of traffic. It was Thursday, late, the kind of night most people stayed in, curled under blankets, waiting for tomorrow. But Damien wasn't most people. He stood outside the same old apartment building, a single bag of takeout in one hand, the other empty. He looked up, second floor, third window from the left. The light was on. He didn't knock immediately. He stood there just breathing. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, faint jasmine from somewhere nearby. Then the door creaked open. Sophie stood there wrapped in a cardigan 2 sizes too big, grinning. You're late, she whispered. I know, Damien said, stepping inside. In the small kitchen, warm light pooled over worn countertops. Elena stood barefoot, stirring something on the stove, hair tied back, no makeup. She turned, saw him. Their eyes met. No dramatic music, no sweeping monologues, just silence. The kind that meant something had shifted, not just in the room, but in them. Damien spoke first. I didn't come to change your life. Elena nodded once. I came because I think I need mine to be changed. Her breath hitched. I don't know what this is, he added quietly, but if you're still willing, I'd like to stay a little longer this time. She didn't rush to reply. Instead, she reached into the drawer, pulled out a second spoon, and handed it to him. Then stir this. Don't let it burn. He laughed, surprised by the simplicity of it. No grand declarations, no neat endings, just a beginning. Sophie giggled from the table, flipping pages of her book. Damien stirred the pot, standing beside Elena, the scent of garlic and thyme rising between them, a life rebuilding itself in the smallest ways. In that moment, Damien understood what he had never been able to buy, build, or control: belonging. Not as a savior, not as a CEO, just someone invited to stay. And in a modest apartment with the rain softening against the glass, a man who once had everything finally had something real. A place at the table, a place to begin again, and two people willing to begin with him. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. In the quiet miracle of Sophie's wrong number call and Damien Ward's unexpected response, we uncover one of life's most tender truths. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage and kindness begin with the smallest, most innocent mistakes. A frightened 7-year-old dialing the wrong number didn't just save her mother. It awakened a powerful, lonely man who had long forgotten what it felt like to matter in someone else's story. This beautiful tale reminds us that hope often arrives disguised as coincidence. That one person's quiet, "I came anyway," can mend wounds deeper than any hospital could heal. And that no life is too small, no pain too hidden to touch another heart. It teaches us to answer when life calls, even if the number is wrong, because redemption, connection, and second chances rarely announce themselves with a fanfare. They simply show up, ready to stay. Which moment in Sophie, Elena, and Damien's journey moved you the most? Share your feelings or a time someone showed up for you in the comments below. Your words might be the encouragement someone needs today. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe for more emotional journeys of hope and humanity, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for being here. Let's keep spreading light together.